The Greens are at it again, making pie-in-the-sky promises to their gullible supporters, with no fear of ever being caught out because, well, they're the Greens, which means they'll never have enough power to actually implement their terrible ideas, and thus they'll never be revealed as the frauds that they are. At this point, the Greens are just a feel-good club for people who don't understand economics. The latest example? Adam Bandt's policy for a 4-day work week. My name's Topher Field, this is the Topher Project, and I help people like you to understand the world as it changes around us. Now, I actually like the idea of a 4-day work week. Specifically, if I could work 4 10-hour days instead of 5 8-hour days, that would be great. And I actually think a significant proportion of Aussie workers, certainly not all, but many, would love to take up the opportunity for a 4 by 10-hour work week if that option was offered to them. But that's not what the leader of the Australian Greens, Adam Bandt, is talking about. He explicitly says less hours, same pay. This is the kind of thing that can only be said with a straight face by someone who has a PhD in Marxist theory, which Adam Bandt does. Surprise, surprise. He actually tried to cover it up with a 3-year suppression order, but, we found out that he's a Marxist anyway. And to be fair, we didn't actually need the documentary proof. It was already obvious that Adam is an economically illiterate Marxist because he says things like, he believes that government can just mandate fewer hours for the same pay and everything will be fine. Yeah, reality and Marxist theory don't get along very well. Here's the bottom line that Marxists and socialists fail to understand. Human beings, on average, can only consume as much as we create. Every day we're consuming food, clothing, energy. We're wearing out our shoes. We're wearing out the floors in our houses, the linen on our beds, the car that we drive. Every day we are consuming, whether we mean to or not. Now that's fine because over time we're also working to create value as well. This is how we can go through life consuming constantly, and yet the world never runs out. It's because we're also going through life creating through work. And so, if we as a species, on average, create more than we consume, then the world gets richer and we leave a legacy to our descendants. If we figure out new technologies, or lower the cost of energy, or organize ourselves in new and better ways that allow us to create more with less time, less energy consumption, less materials, then our productivity goes up and our ability to produce goes up. And that means that the world gets even richer and our quality of life goes up even more. And this is actually why selfish capitalism works and altruistic socialism fails. If I'm the one who reaps the rewards of my own hard work, my own innovation, invention, risk taking, then I'm highly incentivized to find better ways of doing things, more efficient ways of working, creating better products that more people want, etc. In other words, I'm highly motivated to make the world a better place and increase the world's wealth and standard of living because I selfishly want an increased wealth and standard of living for myself. My selfishness has been turned into an incentive to do good by capitalism. In contrast, Marxism and socialism view wealth as a fixed pie. It's something that just kind of exists. And it's all about the redistribution and making sure that no one has too much. The assumption in Marxism is that if you're rich, it's not because you found new and better ways of creating more value and helping more people. No, 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 no. It's because you exploited other people and you got rich at their expense. So Marxists and socialists are all about taking from those evil rich and giving to the victimized poor, which sounds like Robin Hood, but in reality, it's the road to hell. Because now the incentive is backwards. Why would I take risks if I don't get to keep the rewards? Why would I work hard if I'll just be demonized and have the proceeds taken off me and off my family and given to someone who didn't work for it? My incentive now is not to do as much as I can to make my own life better and in the process make the world richer. My incentive now is to live as easy as I can, safe in the knowledge that the work of others will be given to me. But as a result, productivity collapses. And because over the long term we can only consume as much as we create, if productivity collapses, quality of life soon follows. And this is why in Soviet Russia they had that joke. We pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. because the workers would show up and not do much. Why would they? There was no reward for hard work. And then the government would pay them, but not enough to buy much. How could they? There wasn't much to go around. So you end up with a situation in communist countries where everyone has a job, full employment, but everyone is dirt poor. Shelves and stores are empty, and even when you line up from early in the morning in the bread queues and find what you want, you probably can't actually afford it. Because it's not the pay that creates wealth, it's the productivity. And that's what makes this Marxist brain fart from Adam Bandt so dangerous. Adam thinks he understands productivity. He says in this tweet that for too long, productivity gains have resulted in profits for bosses and shareholders while workers burn out, end quote. But actually, right now, we're seeing record numbers of businesses failing. So, if the workers aren't getting the productivity gains and the owners aren't getting the productivity gains, where are they going? Now, I'm sure you've already figured out the answer, but just in case there's any Marxists watching, I'm going to explain it really slowly. If you pay someone the same money to do less, then you need to charge more for your products and services because you have to cover the same expenses out of fewer products, so prices go up. Now, that same worker who feels great about a 3-day weekend every weekend is working less for the same money, yay for me, they go shopping. But now all the prices have gone up because productivity is lower, and the owners of businesses have to recoup the same expenses from fewer products. So now those workers, when they go shopping, they're angry. They have all this free time, but they can't afford to live anymore. So what do? Well, they go and get a second job so that they can now pay the higher prices. And in the end, we're all worse off than we were to start with. Less work for the same money sounds nice, but it is a terrible idea at any time and downright dangerous in a cost of living crisis. This is genuine road to Venezuela stuff. So, what's the answer? Should we maybe force workers to work more hours for the same pay so that productivity goes up and prices drop? No, that's ridiculous. That's the kind of nonsense that Marxists use as scare tactics about the evils of capitalism. It's kind of the Marxist equivalent of a monster under the bed. It doesn't really exist. There's lots of ways to improve productivity and reduce the cost of living that will be good for workers and not bad for them. But first, we need to actually understand what it is that a business does. You see, it's not business versus workers at all. That's just another Marxist trope. The purpose of a business is to produce a product or service that is greater than the sum of its parts, an end result that is worth more than the cost of creating or producing it. And the business gets to keep the difference. A business is like a machine. It's made up of lots of parts which all contribute to an outcome, a product or a service. Now, a well-designed machine that produces a valuable outcome from lower value inputs is like a well-tuned V8 engine which can produce enormous amounts of power from relatively small amounts of fuel. And that's why business owners can make so much money fast. If they develop a business that is tuned up really well and it's producing a higher value output from relatively inexpensive inputs, the business owners keep the difference because that difference was created not by the workers in their machine, but by their design of the machine, by the way they arranged the workers and the parts and the inputs and how they tuned it up to make it run efficiently. You see, Marxists lie and say that the value in a business is created by the workers. But if that's true, then how come we find badly run businesses with lots of workers that aren't making any money? They're going bankrupt. If the value came from the workers, then surely more workers equals more profit, but we know that's not true. Because the ultimate value of a business is created by the arrangement of the parts to work in sync and harmony and in fine tune together. And that's what the owners and the managers do. But a badly run business, well, that would be like a huge marine diesel, a truck engine, let's say, which is terribly out of tune, so badly out of tune that it can barely idle. It can barely even keep itself running. Sure, it has lots of very large and expensive parts bolted on it. It could have turbos and all kinds of stuff that, in theory, makes it capable of generating huge amounts of power. But if it's out of tune, if the parts aren't working together properly, then it's barely even able to operate. And of course, if anything else goes wrong, it just stops working altogether and becomes a worthless lump of rust. because it's not the cost of the parts that make a business valuable. It's whether those parts can work together to create something that is even more valuable than the sum of the parts themselves. So a well-designed business, a well-run business, creates products and services that are worth more than the input costs, more than the sum of its parts. To say it another way, a business has to make more money than it spends, otherwise they run out of money and they go bankrupt. Now that's obvious. But bringing that to front of mind, into sharp focus, offers us incredible clarity about what we can do to fix this cost of living crisis in a way that is good for workers and good for businesses alike. The input costs of business, the parts that they need to become greater than the sum of, are many. From employees, which are the workers, to the materials that get used in the products and services, to the real estate, the building, the office space, the business area that they occupy, to the marketing that they have to do so that people know about their products and services, to the electricity, the energy to run the machines, computers, lights, air conditioning, equipment, and transport. And in Australia, that last one, the energy, that's a killer. We have some of the most expensive energy in our region of the world, and many times more expensive than other economies that we are competing against internationally. And as technology improves, the cost of energy is actually becoming a more and more important input cost. You see, a worker working just with their bare hands can only produce a little bit of productivity each day, which, remembering that on average we can only consume what we can create, otherwise we run out. If workers can typically only produce a little bit of value every day, then they and their families can only enjoy a very minimal quality of life. That's what life was like before the Industrial Revolution, before machines and steam power and energy transformed manufacturing. Adults would work 12 hours a day. Children would start working when they were 8, and in return, they would get a subsistence living at best. But all that changed when machines powered by non human energy were invented. You see, that same worker standing at a machine can now produce way more each day, and more productivity on average means higher quality of life on average. But that machine itself, of course, isn't free. It has to be designed and manufactured, installed, maintained, and crucially, powered. This is true whether it's an old school steam engine or the latest server farm. The principle remains that thanks to machines and the energy to power those machines, workers have become massively more productive over the last 200 years, and that's why our quality of life is outstanding compared to only a few generations ago. But the cost of that energy is now one of the most important input costs to our productivity. In many industries, the cost of energy is greater than the cost of wages. And that's a cost that every business has to recover out of the prices that they put on the products and services they create. Remember, businesses have to create more than they consume too, just like we do individually. Or, in other words, businesses need to create products and services which are worth more than the sum of their parts. So, the more expensive their parts, or the lower the productivity from those parts, the more they have to charge for their product or service, and therefore the cost of living goes up. Okay, you get it, right? So, priority number one needs to be to lower energy costs. That one thing will dramatically improve the cost of living, enabling workers to become more productive and helping all of us to live better lives. But there's another input cost which businesses face which must be dealt with, and that is the cost of government. You see, thanks to government regulations and nonsense, businesses now have to pay a myriad of fees, charges, licenses, charges, taxes, tariffs, and they have to employ people just to keep track of it all and make sure that they are compliant. There is now an entire career pathway in compliance. Compliance is a multi-billion-dollar industry in its own right. And all they're doing is just making sure that each business is up to date with the latest BS regulations that the government has imposed. Regulations that don't necessarily improve the product or the outcomes or even look after consumers. Most of this stuff is just regulation for regulation's sake. And that is not productive work. It's work. They have a job. Like in communist countries, they had jobs, but they weren't productive. That's what the compliance industry and frankly most of government is. It's work, but it's not productive. It doesn't help to create more or better products or services that people want to buy. It just keeps the bureaucrats employed and happy. And all of that adds to the input costs, the costs of doing business, which is another way to say that it lowers productivity, which is another way to say that it makes the cost of living higher, which hurts everyone, but especially hurts workers and wage earners who are working 40 hours a week and yet struggling to make ends meet. If Adam Bandt really actually cares about workers, he will address the cost of energy and the burden of government on business, because that's what would actually help workers. Business is not the exploitation of workers. It is the creation of an organization, a machine, where the workers are one part. But because they're a part of a big machine, they are able to be more productive. And therefore, they become more valuable than they would otherwise be out there working on their own. And if they weren't inside that machine, it is the increased productivity that businesses create which leads to improved quality of life and improved conditions for the workers themselves. It's no coincidence that mechanization has led to reductions in working hours, to the extending of the weekend, to increases in pay, to huge improvements in the working conditions and quality of life of ordinary workers compared to what it was like before the Industrial Revolution. The unions love to take credit for all of that. But ultimately, what they were doing was arguing over a redistribution of the wealth. But that wealth only increased because technology and energy and businesses made workers more productive. So now there was more wealth to fight over. Technology, energy, and well run businesses create wealth. That's what grows the pie. People like Adam Bandt just want to argue about who gets the biggest slice. They want to rob from Peter to pay Paul, whereas business is focused on making the pie bigger so that both Peter and Paul can enjoy a higher quality of life. My name's Topher Field. This is the Topher Project. I help people like you to understand the world as it changes around you. You can get copies of my book, my t-shirts, and my hoodies from goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. You can watch my multi-award-winning documentary about the COVID lockdowns in Melbourne, Australia, the most lockdown city in the world, for free at battlegroundmelbourne.com. And of course, I'd love for you to like, subscribe, comment, and follow me on all the socials via @Topher Field. I'll see you in the next one.